How
Hi,
are ya?
David.
How you doing, man?
Good, good.
Good to see
Doing
you.
great.
Good to
How are
see you
you?
as all. I'm doing great. Excited to be with you here having this conversation. And we're gonna be tackling a lot of topics here. So I'm gonna get into it right away. So to all the community, welcome guys. And let's get in on conversation with Carl here. So Carl, I want to start with something that happened a few weeks ago. And I knew I was gonna keep it in mind because I wanted to address it with you. You're aware of what took place between Pakistan and India regarding the clash. There are some who believe that India has learned the lesson, but I'm not going to talk about what got shut down and all that stuff. What I want to get your take on, Carl, is what was that all about? Was it something that was orchestrated by a third party, and for what objective?
Well, the timing certainly is very interesting because, we actually talk about this. India was just starting to move closer to China after U.S., Canada, everybody was ragging on them for supposedly assassinating U.S. Canadian citizens, and but really it's about India's continued purchase of Russian oil, and it's so because of that pressure, India is having a soft rapprochement moment with China, where they're talking about coordinating trade, and then suddenly the Trump tariff war happened, and India kind of switched the other direction again. They went to the Indian Commerce Minister announced, they're gonna that all the Chinese goods are crap, and they're gonna put more restriction on Chinese import into India, and their Indian trade delegation is going to Washington, declaring that they're going to lower tariff for the American goods, which was hailed by Trump as a great win. And then JD Vance traveled to India.
Oh yeah.
eh,
Oh, yeah.
I'm not saying JD Vance is a Graham Reaper, but like when he what happened when he met the Pope? Pope
Oh yeah.
dies, and then he goes to India, and the Kashmir attacks happen. It's just so. I mean, the timing is certainly interesting, and so because as a result of the Kashmir attack, now Indian government they felt they have to do something,
Yeah.
because the Indian public is crying out for revenge, and the Indian government immediately blames Pakistan for supporting terrorists for
Yeah.
carrying out terrorist activity in India. This is what led to the present conflict because the Indian politician gave an order to the Indian Air Force to strike so-called terrorist camp inside Pakistan. Now, this is a purely political move because they, on one hand, they try to avoid a uncontrollable
Mhm.
escalation. So they apparently told the Indian Air Force, do not strike Indian Pakistani military installation, at least on the
Yeah.
first day. So they aim for non-military. Well, if you think about it, if their target is non-military, wouldn't that mean they're civilian? But
Civilian.
anyways, they claim they strike against the terrorist camp, but it's kind of foolhardy because
Yeah.
Pakistan is not a country without air force and air defense. And it's kind of foolhardy to think that you can do that without expecting retaliation from Pakistan. And
Yeah.
the way they carry on is they telegraph their intent weeks advance, like we're gonna do
Oh.
something, we're gonna do something, we're gonna strike Pakistan. So the Pakistan side were ready for them. The Pakistan Air Force and the air defense system was on high alert for several days. So the
Yeah.
Pakistani Air Force was patrolling the border, and the Indian Air Force walked right into uh, the Pakistani Air Force that was ready for them.
No.
I mean, you can't even call it ambush because you announce to the world what you're gonna do, and then of course the Pakistani Air Force is going to be ready for them. But it does introducing a new dynamic into BRICS because India
Yeah.
is part of BRICS,
Bricks.
and this
Mm.
is obviously not good for solidarity of BRICS members. Um, and this does work to advantage of United States, of course, because it it made India pivot even harder toward United States,
Mm.
and away from China,
Mm.
and it kind of put a stop to the kind of the soft India-China rapprochement that was just beginning to take root, and so now we're seeing, the Indian side, they're very butthurt about what happened. Most of them are still in denial about what happened because the Indian media is not telling them the truth. I mean, the Indian media has been going. I mean, they're painting a entirely bizarro world to their audience, and this is increasingly obvious on social media because all the Western media, including CNN and Reuters, have all reported that it was confirmed that at least one French Rafale jets and at least 2 Indian fighter jets got shut down. But you still have Indian public asking, "Where's the proof? Where's the?" I mean, like these Reuters and CNN, they have no incentive to talk up Pakistan capability or the Chinese weapon system capability, right? And so we're now at a point where Indian government and Indian military will have to come to some hard realizations about their own capabilities, about and then about their opponents, Pakistan, and for the wider military watchers of the world. I think it's I saw some people call this a deep seek moment for the Chinese weapon system, because for the longest time there has been a lot of copiums about Chinese weapons. People are saying, "Oh, it's made in China, so the quality must be not that good. It's shoddy quality." I mean, you even have big publications like Wall Street Journal, New York Times reporting, Chinese missiles are filled with water. No, we can confirm that those PL-15 Chinese air-to-air missiles, their warhead is probably not filled with water. Unless you're trying to claim a warhead filled with water on one of the most advanced European fighter jet, right? I mean, that's pretty impressive tech. Nevertheless, China can use water-filled missiles downing French Rafale jets.
So which is true, Carl, because they were able to shut down Rafale jets, actually the Chinese FL-15 missiles. And this is why, in my opinion, I think what this conflict exposed is the credibility of the Chinese weapon on the global market, let alone the cost. I mean, now everybody's wondering about Rafale, the Western fighter jets. They stood no chance against the Chinese missile, air-to-air missiles.
And one notable thing is that F-16 almost took have very little role in this latest India-Pakistan fight, and this is because when United States sold its latest F-16 batch to Pakistan, they had the Pakistan government sign a end user agreement which says these F-16 will not be used to fight India, which severely limits the utility of those F-16s. And whereas when China sold its J-10Cs, they're not putting restrictions on how they can be used. You bought the weapon, it's yours, it's your weapon. You can use it however you like. And this is one aspect of U.S. weapon sales, is that United States government always try to use weapon sale as a pressure point, try to shape other countries' foreign policy and even domestic policies. And whereas China has always practiced a non-interference foreign policy, for them it's strictly business. And for if you look at the price, you look at the price versus utility. India, just 10 days before the conflict, India announced a new plan to acquire additional 26 Rafale jets from France at $7.4 billion. Wow. If you do the math, that's almost $284 million per plane. Of course, that included spare parts and training. But compare that to the Chinese J-10C, which has a unit cost of 40 to 50 million. So for each French Rafale jets, the price, you can get like 5 or 6 Chinese J-10Cs. And it's like, the choice is obvious. I mean, especially for a lot of South countries, right? This is why now Egypt is in talks of acquiring J10C, because for countries that look to diversify their military supplier, especially if they're worried that Washington might not come through, or Washington might restrict sales to them, or have attached condition on how they can use those weapons. Now there's a clear alternative, at much cheaper price, with proven battlefield victories. But this, by the way, this was the first time Rafale has saw like combat, like against a peer air force, and this was the first time Rafale was shut down. And this is also the first time J10C saw combat, and he had his first kill. I mean, so the choice is clear for most of the global South countries. I think there will be a lot more weapon sales for J10C going on forward. I mean, that's why the stocks of Chengdu aviation industry, the manufacturer that made J10C, went up immediately after the event, whereas the French manufacturer of Rafale, Dassault, their stock went down. And so it's obvious that for people at least people outside of India, they realize what's going on. The momentum is already shifting. This has been a tremendous year for China. First they had, the Red Note moment, and they have the DeepSeek moment, and then now they have the J10C moment. And one thing that the J10C has a big leg. I mean, Rafale is a good jet. I'm not trying to demean the capabilities, but Rafale has the PL-15 air-to-air missile that brought down the Rafale jets. It has a very long range. The export version has about 140 kilometer range. The non-export version have about 300 kilometer range. And whereas the French Rafale, the only weapon system they have comparable is the Meteor missile. But each Rafale can only carry 2 Meteor missile. One J10C can carry up to 10 PL-15 missiles. So even on a even fight, it's like the J10C has 5 times the firepower.
Indeed.
So it's not. I mean, it's this kind of advantage is made even more clear now to potential customers of J10C in the future.
Well, actually, I can confirm your statement, especially about the Egypt. That the head of the Air Force of Egypt was in talks with the Chinese regarding some fighter jets, which was usually here in Washington. It was kind of what the heck Egyptians are doing. I think they are looking into that direction. It's not I think. They are moving into that direction because they are realizing what's taking place in Ukraine, seeing the Western weapons being disseminated by the Russians, and of course the India-Pakistan conflict exposed, as you stated there. I want to just mention one more thing before we jump into some other topics here. Still on the Pakistani-India conflict, and this is my theory, Carl. Am I wrong? I might be wrong. I might not. But in any event, the way I'm thinking about it, how this came about, had to do with undermining the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Will I be right in that assessment?
So for people who might not realize, CPK, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is actually the flagship project of the Belt and Road Initiative. China has invested tons into building infrastructure, roads, ports in Pakistan, and the idea is, they can eventually there will be an energy corridor as well that will connect from Gwadar near the mouth of Persian Gulf and connects to pipe it to Western China in Xinjiang. So that way, all these oil and gas tankers, they don't have to travel all the way across the Indian Ocean, going through the Strait Malacca, the potential choke point of South China Sea. They can just travel from Persian Gulf directly to Port of Gwadar, gets unloaded, transported by pipeline to Western China. That's a long-term vision, right? This is part of the Chinese stream of pearl strategy. Have so many connectivity points that United States Navy cannot be present at all places at all times. So there will be no singular choke point. Instead, they have to spread out thin if they want to choke off Chinese energy supply. Now, this move has been opposed by both United States and India. India also do not want to see Pakistan's economy stabilize because India, and there's a rivalry between India and Pakistan, stretch all the way to the partition in 1947. And so both, this is one area where interests of India and Washington both are aligned. They want to see the CPEC project fail. They want to see they don't want to see the Pakistan-China economic corridor succeed. But having said that, I also observe initially they want, the India side did try to limit the scope of escalation by avoiding to hit Pakistan military installation on the first day. Of course, that was a big mistake. That's why on the second day they launched their unmanned drones and missiles against the Pakistan airbase. But that was more like a face-saving measure because they obviously got humiliated in the first day of aerial battle. They wanted to, to retaliate, and another thing it did interrupt is the idea that people can shift production. U.S. multinational can just shift production from China to India because Tim Cook was just talking about shifting iPhone production to India so India can make special iPhones for Americans, for United States. And now we have this happen. And now we also have Trump coming out and say, I don't want India to make iPhones. I want them to bring production back to the United States. So again, this kind of puts India in a quandary. First, the people can see, okay, well, maybe India is not the best place to park our money and our investment if there could be a big conflict touched off anytime. And at the same time, now Trump himself is coming out against offshoring to India. So this whole India operation backfired in a great way, in big ways. I mean, one way it showed that the deficiency in the India offensive capability. Two, it demonstrated the superiority of the Chinese weapon system, and number three, it showed that India might not be the great place for investment for Western multinational looking to decouple from China. So all in all, it was a great win for China. And I think this is right now. I think Indian politicians are still they're still trying to figure out what they learn from this and how do they move forward. Because this event actually would have ripple effects down the road.
Indeed. Let's talk about really, we're going to be addressing, just for guys to give you an idea as to what we cover here. So I just wanted, I had in mind to ask Carl this question about India, Pakistan, because remember, it happened around the beginning of the month, and usually we meet at the end of the month. But nonetheless, I know it happened, but I want you guys to hear Carl's perspective on this one yourself. So regarding the tariffs, Carl, and as we know, Trump lies, and apparently the lies now are catching up to the point that Americans now are questioning and start to realize the guy has been lying all along to us. So I'm gonna play a clip, and I want to get your feedback on this one here. So guys, take a listen here, please.
Tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens.
Walmart is, in fact, going to eat some of the tariffs.
So Walmart wasn't going to eat any tariffs. It's the American people that's going to end up paying the tariffs. What I want to get into, Carl, is that now we found out, and the whole world knows that Trump's lies about the China tariffs have been exposed. How do you see China moving forward? Because China took a stand, and I am watching around the world, I'm seeing some other countries are kind of learning the lesson from the Chinese, that if you push back against the Americans, against Trump, he might back down.
I mean, that's how you deal with bullies. You know, you don't back down in front of the bully, because if you back down, the bully will just keep on pushing his advantage. And this is why the Trump administration, particularly Trump's advisors, they miscalculated China's intentions and China's capability. I believe Scott Bessent, they really thought that U.S. was the one that hold all the cards. The U.S. Like he said, "Oh, we are the consumers as the end consumers, as the trade deficit nation. We have the upper hand because the Chinese need us. They need our money." But apparently, China was like, "Okay, well, it's time to move on then," and it's the United States that had to chase the Chinese for a deal, because again, China had been preparing for this moment since 2018, since the first Trump term, when Trump started slapping sanctions against China. So China had been prepared for 6-7 years for this moment, whereas the United States was not ready, and especially when majority of this pharmaceutical components come from China, antibiotics, medical plastics. If the trade war were allowed to continue, we'll have more serious problem than just empty shelf. There's going to be hospitals will have to shut down, and again, this is we have talked about this, I believe, on your show, that what would happen if China simply puts an embargo on United States and stops sending goods. Well, Trump helped us to find out. Trump imposed a self-embargo, and what happened was, if they had let the trade war continue, there will be shortages. I mean, like the fact that there hasn't been widespread shortages before they had to talk is because the U.S. consumer were buying off the inventories that the big business has stockpiled over ever since the Trump election. They saw which way the wind was blowing, so all these businesses like Amazon and Walmart, they have been front loading in anticipation of the tariff increase, and so people were still buying off like 5 to 7 days of inventory. But that was how tight it was. Like after that 5 to 7 weeks, I like. If the trade war had continued, like we would have seen shortages in June and July, and this is why Washington were pressured to do the deal, and basically roll back everything, all the tariff they placed on China since the April 2nd Liberation Day announcement, and because if they realized if they had let it run, it will be really, really bad, but even so, the price has already increased, because all these big businesses like Walmart, Amazon, when they're front loading, when they're buying all these goods from China, they have to store them in warehouses, and the additional warehouse fees, guess what happened? They get passed on to the consumer. So we're already seeing price increases, and guess what? Those businesses, once they increase the price, they're not coming back down. I'm sorry. Even if the tariffs get dialed back, but those prices are not coming back down, folks. Like they never decrease prices. When they see consumer will just take those prices will stay up. And that introduced the element of inflation into the U.S. economy. And another thing is, big businesses like Walmart and Amazon, they can handle brief trade interruptions, for like a couple months, because they have the capability to stockpile. But small to medium U.S. businesses who have very thin margins and do not have too much inventory, they're the ones that are getting wiped out. And this is the real effects of the Trump tariff war. It's wiping out tons of U.S. small businesses that do import-export from China. And and but people the I think that the base, the Trump supporters, I think they would still be misled by Trump no matter what, because they still think this is a great Trump win. When you're like, what win? He basically rolled back all the tariffs since April 2nd on China. And how is that winning? All these trade disruption for what? And by the way, the trade the disruption in the supply chain, that's already baked in. Even after Trump had put the 90 days pause, now what happened is even if the Chinese supplier go back to the factory and say, okay, don't worry, we'll send you the goods still, and if they load the ship right now, it will take another 30 days to cross the Pacific to reach the U.S. And and what happened is, before there were very few ships coming to like Port of Los Angeles, and now there's tons of ships that are going to come to the Port of Los Angeles. That's not going to put another big pressure on these ports to handle this kind of new pulse of traffic, because all these ports, they were designed to handle smooth flow of international trade. They were not designed to handle this like big pulses. And so you're gonna have big, trade disruption. Nevertheless, this is going to be just like the back in the COVID days when there was sudden shortage, and then when the COVID restriction were lifted, and suddenly there's a big rush to the U.S. port. So we are still going to look at increasing prices. I mean, there's still going to be inflation, unfortunately, and this is all self-inflicted. This is completely unnecessary, and all they have managed to do is to get Tim Cook to move some Apple iPhone production from China to India, just so Americans will get the made in India iPhones. I mean, that's all he accomplished.
Yeah, but it's still, the prices of the iPhone are so high anyway. So what do Americans getting for it? I think Trump really been exposed now that he realized he was counting that President Xi is going to give him a call and they can make an arrangements, whatever. That's why I've always said there was no deal. I mean, he lied about after the meeting in Geneva between the representatives of the US and China, and claiming a victory. And I was like, what kind of victory are we talking about here? You've been exposed, man. You've been exposed.
And you're right. There's no deal. It's a pause.
No,
it's a 90 days pause.
Yeah.
So what happens if there's a no deal after 90 days? Is the tariff going to go back? I mean, it's going to go back another 90%, another self-imposed embargo. You saw Trump. He just announced that he's threatening to place 50% tariff on
the
Europe,
EU.
Right? I mean, that just remind people. Oh, by the way, that whole tariff thing with China, that's not over yet. That's a 90-day pause. What's going to happen in 90? The thing is, they introduced tons of uncertainty
to the market,
into the market, and the businesses hate uncertainty, because how can you plan out your businesses?
That's true.
If something is subject to change in 90 days, like let's say some businesses, after the Liberation Day, whatever, April, they look for ways to start production in United States, right? And then suddenly there's a pause of tariff, like all their investment now looking like foolish. And businesses, they need stability to plan out for long-term investment. And Trump is kind of throwing that all to the wind just to win some. I don't know. I mean, that was just stupid. That was just so stupid. And it's not over yet, folks. We're not out of the woods.
You're right, because here in the US nowadays, is the consumers that are faced with that reality of the rising prices, and that means that's us who are paying the tariffs. It's not foreign governments. So I am certain that he's been exposed big time. So, and we shall see how this moves forward. So now this leads me to ask a question, Carl, and this is from a bigger picture, just the bigger picture, and it's not just China specifically. It's just whomever. Could this trade war lead to a real war, a hot war. Because again, I'm using history as my guide when I think about what took place with Japan back then, when we
Well, you
imposed.
sometimes you gotta be a little skeptical, a little
Yeah,
cynical, because
yeah,
like why did they do this thing? Why did they do this totally unnecessary tariff war? But then if
yeah.
you think about it, hey, Pentagon has been pushing for decoupling forever. One of the argument for Pentagon's decoupling from China is that the economic relationship with China is too intertwined. That if a conflict does break out between U.S. and China over Taiwan, there would be a huge blowback against the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
So they say, well, the best thing then, of course, is to cut off trade, so you'll make it easier for us to go to war with China. And sometimes you got to think, maybe it's a stress test.
Yeah.
Maybe this whole month of trade disruption is really just a stress test. They want to see how much pain American consumers can take, before stopping at the brink. And based on what I have seen, now I'm even more confident there will be less likely possibility of a real war. I posted about this on Twitter. It roiled a lot of feathers. I said, I based on what I've seen in the trade war, I don't think there will be a hot war, because U.S. has neither the balls nor the means to fight a hot war with China. Because has no means, because what are they gonna do when the United States literally depend on China to supply its daily goods? And we saw kind of the panic that was setting in when people are realizing, oh crap, there's gonna be shortages. And the I mean, like, China can, they are the producer. They can still put, like, in times of war, United States is not even going to be able to replace all the military hardware that's going to be lost in the initial round of the battle. China, on the other hand, they have 200 times the naval the shipbuilding capability than United States. They can easily replace what they lost. And right now, even the Pentagon has given up on manufacturing in the United States, because now it's openly talked about in mainstream media. Pentagon is trying to skirt around the legislation that forbade United States from purchase warship from foreign suppliers. Now they're trying to get U.S. warship to be retrofitted in Korean and Japanese and maybe even Turkish shipyard, because it will be much cheaper. So Pentagon already gave up on manufacturing in America. Like, the hollowing out of the manufacturing sector in the U.S. is now reaching a point. It's starting to affecting the military industrial complex. So they need help from South Korea and Japan to help the naval buildup versus China, because China just has 200 times the shipbuilding capabilities of the United States. U.S. only have 3 shipyards. They cannot match that kind of manufacturing capability. And this is why, first of all, the impetus for war will not have come from China, because as we have seen, China, they're going to rolling out their 6th generation fighters probably around 2030. So why do they need to rush it, at 2027, like Pentagon was saying? 2027 is really the Pentagon schedule. That's not the Chinese schedule. Time is on China's side. The more time they wait, the more relative strength China will have vis-a-vis United States. It's the U.S. that's Pentagon that's realizing now they have a very short, limited time, shrinking time window to contain China, because by as time move on, they will have less capability vis-a-vis China. And this is why I don't think a direct hot war, kinetic war is likely. But I think what would be likely is proxy wars. This is what U.S. excels at. It's try to start these proxy wars on the periphery. To like what happened in the Cold War. There was no direct war between Soviet Union and United States, but many proxy wars will fought all over the globe, particularly in the global South countries. I mean, in Asia, that was why United States went to Vietnam, went to Korea, and I think this is why U.S. is trying to stir up trouble in the South China Sea using the Philippines. Using Marcos regime, but we're already seeing, Bongbong Marcos' popularity just nosedive. In the Philippines, it looks like Duterte's daughter is gonna win. But like her lot of her supporters are now winning in the Philippine election.
In the Senate, yes, they did take majority seats. I was following that one closely, Carl, and it gave me a hint as to the Filipinos now don't want Marcos anymore because he's dragging the country to do the bidding for the U.S. in South China Sea. So
when what Philippines really need is more investment, more infrastructure, which China could help with. That was Duterte's foreign policy toward China. He was he was having doing a rapprochement with China to get more investment into the Philippines, which Marcos had put a stop to that. And so now, but even so, with all these shenanigans, you can still buy BYD Seagull for the most affordable EV in the world in the Philippines, and you cannot get that in United States and Canada. I'm sorry. Sure. I think Seagull now they're selling the Seagull in the Philippines for like $16,000. For a very affordable electric car. It's cheaper than gas car, but it's still not available in United States. Well, because Philippines being in Southeast Asia, like the rest of the Southeast Asian countries are being pulled by the gravitational pull of the Chinese economy. This is why Xi Jinping's first trip, rather than taking the calling Donald Trump at the White House, Xi Jinping just traveled to Southeast Asia. He went to Vietnam, went to Malaysia, because that's where the future is. That's where China's supply chain is expanding to. Trump administration just announced another sanction. Well, they just announced anybody who would buy using Huawei AI chips, will be faced with U.S. sanction. It will be considered a violation of U.S. export control. That applies globally. So what that means is even a Chinese company, if a Chinese company uses Huawei AI chips to train DeepSeek in China, they will be subject to U.S. export control, and they will be placed on U.S. entity list and be blacklisted and get U.S. sanction. So this is a global sanction. It's not like and this is but interestingly, Malaysia just announced that they're gonna start hosting a data center using Huawei chips to host their AI data center. So this is going to be interesting. Like Malaysia has already very clearly took a stance, showing what's the position. They already demonstrated that their future lies with China. This is why Kishore Mubani, the former Singaporean diplomat, had repeatedly tell Washington, please don't make us choose. The Southeast Asian country really do not want to have to choose between U.S. and China. And what he's really saying, you're right. Away, is like you will not like the choice we make if we're forced to make that decision, because we're gonna choose China. Like you're not gonna like that. But Washington keep pushing. Like the Southeast Asian nations, they rather trade with both nations, but the United States and China. But when push comes to shove, they will choose China hands down, because their development relies on China, whereas United States is not offering any kind of alternative in terms of building these countries' infrastructure or investment or anything like that.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Carl, because and this is not it's jokingly per se. Now we're going to be seeing a call for democracy in Malaysia and human rights and so forth, because that's what we do. No, on a serious note, It's
That's what Trump said at the West Point graduation
The
ceremony.
graduation,
By the
yeah,
way,
that's why I
he
brought
said
this
he said,
That's
"Oh,
right.
the job for the U.S. military is not to stage trans shows. I don't know how many trans shows U.S. military stage, but it's not stage trans shows or transform foreign culture. It's to export democracy at
Trust.
point of a gun." I'm like, wait, what? I thought you move away from that, but yeah, like the great thing about Trump is he says those things like. He says those quiet things aloud, he voices those quiet thoughts aloud. So everybody think, okay, this is what US is really about. This is really about exporting quote unquote democracy at point of a gun.
Well, I even went ahead and issue a statement about threatening other countries if they ever threaten the US. Why would other countries threaten the US for? And I think, to me, it starts to feel like Trump is sort of reflecting the sense of how the world is moving away without the United States. So that's the way I see it. So if you want to create a path for yourself through this means, that means nobody wants to deal with you. So, and this brought me back to your point earlier about trying to contain China. I've argued for so long, Carl, that it's too late for the United States to contain China. China is and was not the Soviet Union. The conditions of today's reality, the geopolitical realities, when it comes down to China, are very different from what it was during the era of the Soviet Union. And this is why I believed, and I literally made this clear when I was still in Washington, that the idea of containing China is not going to work. Simple as that. So,
David, the thing is, they're still fighting the last war. They think, okay, we remember how the Cold War 1.0 when we won, Soviet collapse. Let's just bring that back versus China. But they don't realize the balance of power has shifted. Now, if they want to put trade restriction on China, create a separate block, like a China center block and U.S. center block, guess what? Yeah. The U.S. center block is going to more look like the Soviet bloc in the Cold War 1.2. It will be a much smaller collection of economies versus, China, which do business with the rest of the world. And it's not going to be China that loses in that competition. It's going to be United States. And the problem is that right now the elite in Washington have their heads stuck so far up their ass, they can't see it.
Yeah, they don't want to see it, is the truth, but they don't want to see it. So I want to go back to one particular point, Carl, about Taiwan, because you mentioned about South China Sea and so forth, while I'm thinking about it. Why? Because I read the statements by the Taiwanese governor. I call him governor. I don't call him president because I don't recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. So it's on the record. I have nothing against the guy, of course, but I just perceive him as a governor. So the governor of Taiwan, he said that I am offering peace to China, but I must strengthen defenses. So this is what Lei Chai-te stated. So makes me just wonder what was behind that statement.
Well, I mean, right now it's non sequitur because China has always said that they're open to talks. But the condition is that both sides need to come to the table with the recognition that there's only one China, and and you will have to acknowledge that. And that there's a so-called 92 consensus. This is when representative from mainland China and Taiwan met in Singapore back in 1992, and they came to one consensus like, okay, we both agree there's one China, but we allow for different expression what we think that one China should be. Where mainland China think one China should be People's Republic of China, and in Taiwan they think it means Republic of China. But at least that's a framework where both sides can agree on there's only one China. So but Lai Ching-te's administration that came to power denouncing that agreement, denouncing 92 consensus. So unless he goes back, unless he do a 180 switch from his party's position, because his party's platform officially is still Taiwan independence. You know, like, but now he's kind of wiggling out by saying, oh, Taiwan is already, because the Republic of China is already an independent country, so we don't have to declare independence. But to really have a talk with China, they will actually have to acknowledge there's only one China. I think I don't think he's at that step yet. So all these gesture that he's saying he's ready for talk with China, I think that's more of smokescreen, because the talk won't happen until he acknowledged the 92 consensus that there's only one China, and then, you know, everything is up for talks. But I think maybe one of the thing, maybe what he saw the result of the Indian-Pakistan conflict. he saw
That's true. He learned the lesson.
Because the best jets the Taiwan have now is F-16s, and
it's a relic of the past. That one car stands no chance against the J10 or the J36. The Chinese next generation.
So they're not. So maybe, you know, or maybe he saw what's happening in Ukraine. You know, that's really a more stark example. But right now he's still following like the program of trying to, you know, the so-called porcupine strategy advice the U.S. advisors make. Taiwan like bristles with weapon systems. This is why I have a friend, Xiang Yu. He's in Taiwan right now. He served as his kind of like compulsory service, because he was already like he's either late 20s or early 30s. So instead of doing like military service, he did like a community service, a fireman. But now he's been recalled back to do firearm training. And he said, like, this is a new thing. They now the Taiwan government is trying to make people to go back and do firearm training, and people are actually not a great fan of that, because they felt, okay, we have already done our time, we have already done our service. Why do we need to do this? And I think that's what he's talking about. He's like, we still need to arm ourselves. You know, on one hand, that's also to please Washington, because like Washington had been screaming for, especially in the recent years, about how Taiwan has not done enough to defend itself. You need to buy more weapons from us. You need to buy more U.S. weapon platforms. And so they have to go through the motions of like increasing the military service, like. When the DPP, Lai Ching-te's party, came to the platform, you know, one thing they promised was to reduce the amount of time people have to serve in the compulsory military service. You know, they cut down from like at one point they cut down, I think, to 4 months, which is a joke. You can't get anything done in 4 months.
Nothing.
But so now they're reversing that policy. They now extend it back to 1 year. And now they're making the people who even have done their training time to go back and to do like a refresher course, a firearm refresher course. But it's not very popular, because a lot of people feel like, why am I wasting my time? You know, why are you wasting my time? Then there's actually recent protests, like huge popular protests against the Taiwan government, attended by like 300,000 people, and there's barely any reporting in the English language media, because that just doesn't fit the narrative, right? Because the narrative is like, we're protecting Taiwan, the tiny plucky democracy, against the big bad China, right? But then why are these people protesting the government in Taiwan that we support? You know, like that. People just would not compute, right? So they just decide to completely ignore it. All these protests, you barely know any. You would not even know there's big protests in Taiwan right now against its government. You know, unless you read Chinese in the Chinese language media. You know, like that's but the reality is, Lai Ching-te now is just very unpopular. He's just like Marcos in the Philippines right now. He's not very popular. And we're gonna have to see how the election shape up in the next round of the Taiwan election, if he keeps doing what he's doing.
Yeah, I was made aware of that those demonstrations, Carl, through an email, and I shared it with the community. So I did bring it up, and I did mention how interesting that the Western media is not addressing this. I was in Taiwan physically last year, so I kind of saw with my own eyes, and kind of like, no, they're not going to cover, they're not going to address that one. So it'll be interesting to see. So let's move on to one thing I want to get your take on before I'll jump into two more other key topics that I have to have your insights about. One of them has to do with the President Xi Jinping's recent trip to Indonesia. Now, what do you make out of that? It's because, remember, the last trip went to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Malaysia, right? And remember, I asked you the question, Carl. I said, why not Indonesia? Well, I didn't know at that time that apparently Beijing was thinking in terms of a separate trip to Indonesia. Why is that, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, Indonesia is always going to be on the table because Indonesia is the largest country in ASEAN. It's the fourth most populous country in the world, and I still stand by my theory when I talked to you last time that Beijing was trying to give breather room to the Indonesian government when they're trying to negotiate a trade deal in Washington, because Indonesia is one of the first countries that sent their trade negotiation to Washington, and that's when they were told like how the Indian QR code system for mobile payment, it was unacceptable because it's only friendly to local Indonesian vendors but not friendly to big US companies like MasterCard and Visa. It has nothing to do with bring manufacturing back home to the United States. It's all about like financial domination. And so now China is visiting Indonesia because China is not ignoring Indonesia. Indonesia is too big, too important to be ignored. And there's a lot of Chinese investment right now in Indonesian economy, in Indonesian infrastructure. More Chinese EV makers are coming to Indonesia. BYD is still building their factories here. That's due to open next year.
And you're still gonna are you still gonna get the car, a car by the end of the year, right?
I couldn't wait. I mean, I wanted to wait for the BYD, but I can't wait because I have to drop my kids at school. And it's just not safe on a scooter. So I bite the bullet and I bought a GM card, David. But GM joint venture in China. It's a Wuling. It's a Wuling Bingguo. Like Wuling is actually the best-selling GM brand in China right now. It's GM. I think GM has a 34% stake. GM owns 34% of the Wuling. But it's an electric car. I bought an electric Wuling Bingguo. And it's great. I mean, so far my wife love it. Whatever keep my wife happy.
Very important.
I personally, I would rather wait a few more months because now BYD just announced they're bringing over Seagull in June and July, like next month.
When I saw those in China, I know.
But I mean, like, it's okay. I mean, like, I probably still got better because because Wuling, they also have their own factories in Indonesia. So when I bought the car, I got the Indonesian government discount, like almost $5,000 discount for buying cars made in Indonesia. So I got that $5,000 discount. So like I mean, like, whereas BYD, their factory is not ready yet, so they will not be able to get that discount until next year, until their factories start producing. So I mean, my wife's like, hey, we can always get another car a few years down the road. I'm like, yeah, that's true, because by then they will have better features then, probably much better features, much better software. So okay, well, I'll just wait for a few more years before I get my dream car.
Well, speaking of that one, Carl, regarding future and so forth, here is what happened. An American researcher, you know what he stated in an argument is that Beijing will dominate the world in the future, and Washington will have no solace. And you know what brought this up? It was this picture right here. Check this out. This one with the automation of the AI involvement into all this. So maybe by the time you wait for the new car, BYD will have some very advanced features in that car that you can find anywhere else in the world. They already, I heard that they are using, the BYD is using certain chip technology from Huawei that is been embedded into. Am I correct in this car?
That's I'm not sure if it's BYD. Like Huawei, they have their own cars. Actually, they also work with a bunch of Chinese automaker like Chang'an Automotive. Chang'an Automotive is actually from my hometown of Chongqing. They partner with Huawei. You know, their cars will use Huawei software. And Huawei have their own cars as well. Like I was telling you, when I was in Shanghai, I walk into a Huawei store. Like half of the store is like Huawei phones and laptops. The other half of the store is like Huawei cars. You know, the cars I've never seen before, and they're all very nice. And you know, there are tons of, and they're cheap in China. Like 24,000 USD dollars in China can buy you a very premium
luxury
car,
one,
like very luxury feel, very luxury. But once they leave China, the price goes up. like the Wuling Bingguo that I bought in China, it sells for like $12,000. Here I bought it after discount. After discount, I paid $20,000. So like $8,000 more than what the consumer would pay in China. And so, you know, the Chinese consumer are getting spoiled. But now BYD, they are gonna all the Chinese manufacturer, actually, BYD, Geely, they're all going to have a big push to do export because the competition inside China is getting too intense. You know, they have a lot of price cutting inside China to undercut each other. So now they're trying to export more of their cars abroad, which would be great for the global consumers. And they have and they are, I mean, they're definitely going to have much better features in coming years. Like one of the Chinese battery makers, CATL, they already announced they're developing the solid state battery and also sodium batteries, so which will make batteries much cheaper. And the biggest cost of the electric car is actually in the batteries. So if they drastically reduce the cost of the batteries, that's going to bring the price of the car down. I think in a couple years, like electric cars going to cost less than ICE cars. I firmly believe that. Like, I mean, that's already the case, starting to be the case in China, but globally, I think in a couple years, we're going to see electric cars be cheaper than gas cars. And so far, I'm pretty happy with my Wuling Bingguo. Because I just had the home charging installed, but I have to wait for the electric company to come to hook it up. So in the meantime, I get charged for free at the Wuling dealership. So I haven't paid anything for operating my car for last like I had the car for like almost a month now. You know, like no expenses, no operating expenses.
Great. Liking this video so far? Don't just be a watcher. Go ahead and hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And don't forget to tap the bell so you will not miss any of my videos or live streams. This way, you will be supporting a channel that stands for the truth and objective reporting. The choice is yours. Thanks for your support. We are at the last segment here, Carl. And I can't let you go without getting your opinion about what took place between China and Colombia regarding the BRI that Colombia now joined the officially per se. How is this going to now transform, if I may use the term, transform Latin America's relations with China, and also is going to impact the U.S. Sort of relations with Latin America?
Well, I did a Twitter post on this. I said, you know, the Monroe Doctrine is over because Colombia is one country in Latin America that has traditionally the closest ally of the United States, right? Like all the U.S. war on drugs and all that. That's all happening in Colombia, and the U.S. traditionally very tight with the Colombian military, and basically making them go after all the leftist guerrillas and stuff. So Colombia is now at the point where they're ready. They're ready to diversify their relationship, to have a close strategic partnership with China. This is huge. Colombia is a very populous country. Right now, majority of Latin American country already doing trade with China. And they, right now you can get BYD Seagull in Costa Rica, guys. You can get like all these Chinese EVs in Costa Rica. But you will not be able to get it in the United States and Canada.
Of course.
Sorry, and the vast majority of the Latin American country, and they have more positive views with China and their relationship with China than with the United States. And this is what makes a lot of people in Washington, particularly likes of Marco Rubio, very uneasy, because they always say, "Oh, we're the champion of democracy and freedom," right? And then it turns out they're not very popular in Latin America, because the Latin Americans has suffered all these U.S. arrogance for so long, and now they have a clear alternative. U.S. is not the only model for development anymore. And China have showed that they provide real alternatives by providing investment, by providing infrastructure. Everybody wants that. Everybody wants investment in their infrastructure, and that's something that U.S. is finding increasingly difficult to compete with, because only thing U.S. can offer is weapons and military bases, and this is why. The Trump tariff, going back to the Trump tariff, what it has really shown, it was China that's emerging as a global leader, and China rather than the United States is the indispensable nation. The country that makes things rather than just a country that buy things with paper IOUs, and like people can always. The conceit in United States is that, they need us to buy their goods. No, like they can buy their own goods. People in the global South, they have a demand for goods too. And China made that possible. Like I pointed out before, China had made smartphone affordable to the global majority, and now they're gonna, Washington called that China exporting deflation, but what actually happened is China is actually enabling the global consumer culture by providing affordable goods, and that will continue.
Well, that's why we are witnessing, for example, the Chance port in Peru, and how that's gonna now increase the transfer of goods, commodities, and so forth between Latin America and China, and the rest of the world, for that matter, for those who are interested. Now, the one thing that the U.S. ended up doing following this agreement between Colombia and the U.S. And China, I'm sorry, is that we have forced Panama to agree to allow U.S. fighter jets on the Panama. I was like, what the heck are we doing there with the fighter jets? It just didn't make sense.
I mean, that's just another example. Only thing U.S. can offer is military base and weapons, and this is why they're trying to reassert the control of Panama Canal. And by the way, the Panama Canal deal was vetoed by the Chinese government. so in the end, the Chinese government put their foot down and telling the owner of these the Hutchinson, which operated those two ports, and no, you can't sell to BlackRock. Sorry, we disapprove. And so the deal is off. But the reason why U.S. want to control the Panama Canal is again, they want have a veto over Chinese trade with Latin America. They're not happy with the way the direction things are going.
Yeah.
But China says no. Sorry, BlackRock, you can't have those ports. We vetoed it. So this might be another military hardware into Panama right now to apply further pressure. We're gonna have to see how that works out. But again, I don't think that will work out in the long term. In the long term, people still want development. That's what everybody wants.
That is true. That is true. Let me say thank you to some of the supporters here. Noel, thank you so much for your super sticker, and thank you to Carl. Well, thanks for him being here with us. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Rafael, you wrote, thank you as always for your continued support, man. Truly appreciate you for that. Malaysia is going to replace India in BRICS. Yeah, it makes sense to me. I never.
There's already Indonesia. There's already Indonesia for the eye.
Yeah.
The eye for Indonesia.
On a serious note, Carl, I never believed that India is a good fit for BRICS. I could be wrong, but that's how I've always felt.
I think the inclusion of India is you rather have India on your side than working with Washington, right? Even though I think they understand India is kind of trying to perch on the fence, trying to get the deal out of both sides. But still, it's better to have to keep them close, to keep the India close, so you're aware of what's going on, right? Then have them in the opposite camp completely.
Once again, Rafael, thank you so much for your kind support. And yes, China will go to war with the West because unlike Russia, where Putin is making decisions, China is following blueprint led by Mao. Very, very interesting statements. Do you see this happening, Carl?
Well, I mean, depending what you mean by war, right? I mean, like right now, China is already upending the Western dominated world order. This is what those people upset those people in Washington because they have seen the Western dominance of the world being eroded away, and China is leading is leading that change. But China is not looking for a big catastrophic kinetic war against the United States that could end civilization. No, if anything, China doesn't. This is a serious misunderstanding. China does not even want to destroy the U.S. China actually wants U.S. to do well so it can continue to participate in the global trade system. Because war is bad for business. China is all about business.
That's true.
And China hates the one thing that China hates is instability. Right? China does not like war. And if U.S. collapses, that's actually pretty terrible for the global peace and stability because that would be a major disruption to the global trading system. China do not want that. China actually do not want to see U.S. fail. This thing that people in Washington don't understand because people in Washington keep on shooting themselves in the foot. Donald Trump is doing more damage to United States than China ever could. This is why we have that meme where CIA just uncovered the secret Chinese plot to sit back and watch United States decline.
I remember.
Almost all the problem U.S. empire faces today is self-inflicted.
Which is true.
China didn't have to do anything. This is why we have that meme: China do nothing and win, because China's goal is not to destroy United States. China's goal is to work on itself, to provide prosperity for its people, and in doing so, you also realize it can do better for Chinese people, but also other people by building up global interconnectivity, by building global infrastructure. That's what China is good at. And if given the chance, I'm sure China would love to invest in United States, build EV factories here, invest in the high-speed rail there, but it's the United States that's resisting that future.
We won't want that.
Yeah,
that's true.
That's where we are.
That is true. EFU, thank you so much for your super sticker as always, and your support rather. United Asia, SAE, thank you. Southeast Asia, thank you so much for your super sticker. Rafael, you have another one in which you made a correction. I was wrong. Yes, I could tell, Rafael, you meant Indonesia, not Malaysia. You meant Indonesia is going to replace India. So I see you got it. You got it, Rafael. So I knew Rafael, because he was. I said I'm sure he was thinking in this term. So because Indonesia will make more sense into that. So, well, Carl, I'm going to give you a last word, Carl, and the last word I want you please to highlight for my community and for viewers from around the world is, how do you see now that Trump sort of bullying tactics, lies, and all that is exposed? And we also seeing how China took stand, and taking that stand is giving like more courage now to some other countries to say, you know what, we're gonna push back. And what would you say to us American consumers, given what's going on?
Well, Trump is a great uniter of Eurasia right now. Because Trump is making China, South Korea, and Japan sitting at the same table agreeing to a trade deal. By the way, China just signed another deal with ASEAN for the ASEAN plus China free trade zone. This is a trade zone with 2 billion people, because China has 1.4 billion people. Southeast Asia has 680 million people. Altogether, that's more than 2 billion people. This is huge. And China is already working with EU actually representative, including von der Leyen, actually will be in China next month. And they will be talking about removing mutual trade restrictions, so hopefully after July, you'll be able to buy BYDs at much cheaper price in Europe, because right now you still have to pay like a 38% tariff, because any cars export to Europe, they have to pay 10%, but it's the Europe slap another 28% on Chinese EVs on top of that. So BYD current BYD export to Europe, they're a little bit they're almost like triple the price what they cost in China because of those tariffs. But hopefully after the talks, those restrictions will be removed. But again, this is all because of Trump. It's Trump that bringing everybody together. Trump, the great peacemaker. I call him my president for accelerationism.
Interesting. I got 2 more individuals here for the super sticker. I have to say thank you to our members in the community here. Kevin Baptist, much appreciate your kind support as always. You wrote, whether China wants it or not, war has been declared. So sort of from what the US in terms of what they are thinking.
Yeah, US will always push for that. US is
for sure
always going to push for war, but the capability. One thing I agree with Mearsheimer is he's talking about, okay, intention doesn't matter. It's about capability, right? You know what? The capability of United States to do mischief is getting eroded year after year after year, because as US continue to lose its manufacturing base. So as the time goes on, the US will have less it will be less capable to cause mischief. So we can look forward to that.
That's true. One more super sticker once again from Rafael. By the way, Carla, Rafael is an avid supporter of the channel, so it's been so generous with the channel. So thank you so much, Rafael. You wrote, China will not let what happened to the 2 cities in Japan happens to them. I couldn't agree more.
That's why China have nuclear weapons. That's why China developed nuclear weapons back in the 60s.
And they will not hesitate to use them if their sovereignty is threatened. I have no doubt about that. So what China will be one of those. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed listening to Carl here. Carl, on behalf of the entire community, we'll say thank you again for really carving out time for us here. and I look forward to seeing you next time. As always, greatly appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
You take care, my